Huge thanks to our sponsors for making ResolveCon 24 possible. Motion VFX makes the best plugins for DaVinci Resolve. They have plugins to quickly add beautiful graphics to any kind of project you're working on, and they're compatible with both Mac and Windows. And right now you can get their mHello 3D for free. This is a pack of super useful 3D shapes that you can add to any video and take your visuals up a notch. Just click right here or the link in the description. And of course, ResolveCon would not be possible without Blackmagic Design. They just came out with the full release of DaVinci Resolve 19. For editing, color, effects, and audio, it's pretty much everything you need to make any kind of project in DaVinci Resolve. You can download DaVinci Resolve 19 right here or in the link in the description.
Little bit of talking background. So Universal Scene Description was originally developed by Pixar. So it's coming from the world of big animation studios and was established in different animation studios to handle their 3D assets, because the problem with 3D software for a long time has been that one artist works on one model, and when he's done, he maybe sends it to someone else, version 1, right? And then someone else might do something, then comes version 3, and afterwards version 2 gets updated, and the other artist wants to work in another software and it's not compatible, and some materials look different, and then you have a renderer here and one there, and everything breaks apart and falls apart, right? So Universal Scene Description was really developed with a mindset to say, okay, we may have more than one person, maybe more than one studio, more than one group, whatever, working on something. We may also have more than one software package involved, right? So we are probably not doing everything in Fusion if we are doing 3D, but we probably don't want to do modeling in Fusion, but maybe we want to do it somewhere else. And for this to all work together, that was kind of the incentive to develop USD. From there, it's gone really in all directions. So big companies have come on board. NVIDIA is doing a lot in that space. There are a lot of industrial applications now coming with USD. So they also have 3D, right? They have CAD layouts from their factory shops and robots and whatever. And they also want to manage 3D assets, and they want to have these digital twins and work with sensor data and all that kind of stuff. And that's also, they use the same technology to some degree. So it's an exciting and emerging space. In Fusion, we started to get USD tools with 18.5, and we have seen additions over the last update. So we got Material X a bit later. Now with version 19, there's again some stuff coming. We got now the volumetric data being included. So we see some active development in there, and it's getting more and more interesting with each release. And hopefully that trajectory will continue. And in that case, it's really something to look into. So let me directly jump into Fusion. By the way, there are some assets for download. However, I suggest, especially if you're completely new intermediate in Fusion, just watch. The assets are there to play around. You can try some of these things later. If you're watching live, it will probably be hard to do everything like right away, because I'm a bit going through different topics and show also some prepared things, including some stuff for myself. But nonetheless, a lot of the stuff is available for free, and you can jump in with this. And while talking, I just realized that I made the big sin of not starting my timer, so Casey will complain at the end. I assume I talked for 5 minutes and started now. If not, then Casey will probably interrupt me later. We'll find out. Okay, so I am here in a traditional 3D system, right? So just as a quick run through what is in a 3D system, and then we can see what needs to be in a USD 3D system. So we have some geometry. All of that is in this part of my Fusion flow, right? So we might have shapes like the plane or this cone here. We can have textures on it. Like here we have the marble material that somehow will interact with light. We can have 3D text. We can have images or even projections in the standard 3D system. And of course, we can have a 3-dimensional rail, as yesterday being developed by Patrick with 3D shapes. I believe that is part of the new standard elements for 3D systems. So of course, I had to include it today. Now, We have geometry, we have materials, very basic color or with textures. Then we need to enable some light. Let me turn on lights and shadows. Then things start to look a little bit better. So in this case, I have a spotlight which is shining on here and an ambient light which just fills it up. So we need lights. We do need a camera which kind of looks at the scene and tells us, well, which part from where do we want to see this at the end. And then we need a render node, which creates, again, a 2D image as per the movement of the camera and as per the 3D setup. It creates our final image that we can send to the edit page or render out to disk or whatever and continue working in 2D. All right, how does this look if we have a 3D system? Let me open the effects library. How does this work if we have USD? So we kind of need the very same ingredients, right? So we need a mesh or 3D objects, and you have here a U shape, which is the analogous to the shape 3D. So basically everything starts with U for USD, and then you have very similar things. So you have a U shape, and you see there are some primitives, some cones and testing objects that you can use. And the standard one is the capsule, doesn't matter. We need to get this out at the end. So in this case, we have a U render node, which needs to be at the end. And we might even see, yeah, we already see something if we turn it on. There's just a default camera and default lighting, because I haven't established that here. But you already see something when you connect it. However, you need to merge in cameras and lights once you want something more than the default. So you need, instead of your 3D merge, you need a U merge. This is where you can collect all the different 3D objects. And a light and a camera is nothing but a 3D object. So you can use a U camera, but actually you can also use a regular camera 3D. Doesn't make much of a difference. So some objects you can use from the regular system. Let's come back to this a little bit later. Let's first add a light and a material, and then we will see how we can add some more interesting and complex stuff in here. So in terms of light, you see the lights up here. They are somewhat similar to the lights in the regular 3D system. So you see a distant light, which is the same as the directional light in the 3D system. You see a dome light, which I want to use now. This is slightly different. It can be used as an ambient light, but it can also be used in a slightly different way. I can turn on the scene lights once you have it. And you see that suddenly I see an image background behind. So we have support for image-based lighting in the USD scene. This is not, at least out of the box, not supported in the regular 3D tools, but it is a relatively simple and frequently used way of lighting 3D scenes. You just need a spherical image with a high dynamic range, which gives information about, where is the light coming from, where is it not coming from. Just for reference, I have included a few of these HDRI maps as EXR files in the exercise asset folder. If you want to play with this, you typically use those kinds of environments and then can use them to recreate the lighting that you either had actually on set. If someone took that image on set, you can recreate on-set lighting, or you can use it creatively by choosing the environment that you want. Here in this example, one thing you might want to do here, first of all, you can easily adjust the intensity, but you can also rotate it typically around Y. And this makes sense if you just want to place the direction of the sun in a certain place. So this is something you can do in USD that our previous or standard 3D system in Fusion does not support out of the box. Another thing where USD is way more advanced than the standard system is when it comes to materials. So when I use this shape here, you see already a material tab. Similar to the standard system, we can do things directly in the tab. And, well, we can simply set a color, but you already see a few more options here. And there are actually two different materials part of the USD implementation. One is a, let's say, USD material, which is based on a physically based rendering of materials. So you have physical properties like roughness of the material, or opacity if it's transparent, or if it's emitting light. You have those kind of properties represented that are like physical properties of the materials. And this is what you find in pretty much all modern 3D software, and what is often used. Another thing is you have Material X. And Material X is another system of describing materials that from its beginning was intended to be across applications, was originally developed by Industrial Light and Magic and then open sourced later. And this is frequently used together with USD. And it's a very modern way of describing materials. And if you don't want to develop materials yourself, you could do this in other software packages, but you can load a Material X. And I already put one here, but you find it, you can drag and drop it from the asset package. I have some links where you can download it in the descriptions. So let's just take any one of them. This sounds interesting by the name of it. There's no direct preview, but what you can do is you can replace a material. So the way how this works here, if you want to use an external material, you do replace material, bring this into the flow, and then connect that Material X. And it sometimes takes a short time. And here we have our rather dark wooden shiny material attached. So material and lights. Now let's talk about camera and additional geometry. So this U shape is obviously very limited. Now, if you are inclined to make a short film where a cone is falling in love with a cube and being chased by a cylinder, please boldly advertise it in the chat. Otherwise, we need different places to get our geometry from. And one way is we can take geometry over from the traditional system. However, not everything that we build here can be fed into USD, and we cannot go the other way around. As of now, I'm not sure if this will, some of this will change in the future, but I can, for example, even from this merge, I can go and connect into the U merge. And basically, it's trying to bring everything from here into this system. So whatever you could previously do in 3D, you can bring into USD to some extent. And if I bring this into the viewer, we'll see where the limits are. So for example, you see that the texture here, the material is not coming through. This is just turning purple, which is probably like the error color in this case. So not working. So textures generally don't come through. That's also a problem for our image plane. So the image plane doesn't come through. There is a U image plane. It is somewhat restricted compared to the traditional 3D system, at least at the moment. So you can use it, and then you can load a file here. But so far, I don't think it works for moving footage or for animations or for stuff you build inside Fusion. So you are at the moment a bit limited in terms of what you can do with textures and so on. Some of these limitations may be due to the render engine. Some of them may be due to USD modalities. So speaking of render engine, so at the end, you see how it's being rendered out. There is a render engine here, which is called Storm. That is currently the only one that is available here. This was developed by Pixar and is like the standard engine that comes with USD installations. It's good for preview purposes. That's what it's developed for, as a preview engine in the viewer. It doesn't have the very highest quality of results. Now, we don't always need that, depending on what you're doing. You may be quite fine with it. However, at the moment, there's simply no other choice, and this simply doesn't support everything. I am reasonably confident that we will see some development here at some point, because now that Blackmagic Design is bringing all these USD tools, I'm pretty sure that sooner or later they will bring out a software development kit where plugin developers can start to bring in other render engines. That's been something that people discussed for a decade with the traditional system, and there, even though the software development kit was available, no vendor really managed to bring it into the end. Nobody did the effort. With USD, it should be much easier. So I'm very hopeful here. Let's switch this to scene and see if we get some light information. So yeah, we are getting our U dome light, but we are not getting those lights, right? So those lights will not transfer. We are also getting the camera. So my camera, my regular camera, works in USD as well. So we can get the text over, so you can do text-based animations in USD. Basically, everything in terms of geometry will come. Some basic colors, like the color of the whale, is maintained, but more complex materials you should do in USD. But there you also have the more advanced material system, so it makes total sense to do it here. Speaking of doing it here, let's say we want to change this material, then we can do this and also learn a bit more about USD and the USD scene graph. So I will put a U replace material here at the end. Now it's replacing everything and making everything white, which is this material. However, you see here this prim selection. So prim or primitive is like a basic object inside the 3D scene, so to speak. And what you can do is, if you have the 3D scene in the viewer, you can use this picker and select something, for example, this cone here. And now you see we are replacing the material from the cone. Now we just can attach a material X or another material. Actually, I have, just for demonstration, created a shader here, which is just this one here. And this one is a PBR-based shader created from textures. So in this case, you have a diffuse texture and a roughness texture. And those people who work with 3D software have probably seen those. Those who find this like completely strange, if you work with 3D materials and you get these texture files usually. One texture gives you like a base texture. Another one gives you information where this material is rough, where you see these little dots. And all this informs how light interacts with this material, right? And the U shader can be used with all those textures if you want to manually set up a shader from textures. So that is also supported. I'm not doing this from scratch here, but we might as well connect it just to see how it's going. And there are even more inputs just to show you. I just hold Alt to show you. So there are all the inputs that 3D artists would find familiar. So this one was the diffuse color. So now after this replace material, if I have used the correct primitive, we have replaced the material that wasn't working from the original scene. Now here you see that there is like something that looks almost like a file path. And this is one thing about USD. So everything that is in the scene can be referenced with a path. And this path is giving you a hierarchy of objects, materials, lights, everything that's in the 3D scene. So everything there can be accessed. And whenever you have this kind of selection, you can either select a single one like this. You could, in theory, type it or add multiple in here. Or you can just click once on pick. And then you get a browser where you see all the different objects. So for example, if I want to take this image plane here as well, I could open that as well, Control select, OK. And now my material was attached to this one as well, my material replacement. OK, so this is how this works. Now I want to make a bit of a cut and move to a scene that comes from externally, because this is probably one of the most important reasons why we have universal scene description. So if you just want to work in Fusion, it wouldn't need to be universal, right? Blackmagic Design could have instead invested into improving the traditional system, right? So, but people do work in other applications. They do bring stuff in. And let's do this. Let's go to, I created another blank Fusion comp here. And I already threw in the kitchen scene. You find the link if you want to play with it later from NVIDIA. Pixar created this. There is a test scene that you can use. Just to let you know, I'll just show you quickly where it's from. if you go to developer.nvidia.com/USD, you find a few different test scenes of different complexity. This one is the easiest one, and the reason that I'm using it now is because this is a live stream and the other scenes take time to load, and if I load them in 2 different software packages on the same machine at the same time, there is an increased likelihood that things will crash and Casey will get mad at me for taking too long. So that's why I'm taking this scene. The residential lobby is the next complex one that you can try that also works pretty well. This one here, I've tried this one, but it has very complex lighting, so the preview render engine will not do so well, and it's also pretty big, and some of the others, they're also like 60 gigabyte scenes. So it's more for people who are already a bit experienced in that area, because you don't just load it and see what happens. Usually there's some more thought process behind those big production scenes. So the kitchen set works super easy. You can just bring it in and have a look, and you see a scene. And yeah, we have different objects, and you can again see the hierarchy of those objects. This one does not come with lights. It does not come with cameras. We could bring in our U render node and all of that. Or we could modify that scene and then bring something in which is more closer to, hey, let's render something, right? Let's bring something in from a 3D software. I am showing you where I did this, and for this example now, I actually used from NVIDIA the USD composer. You don't need to use that. It's just a stand-in for any arbitrary USD software as far as today's session goes, for any arbitrary 3D software. I've used Blender in the past. Blender can export USD. It doesn't have the full feature support yet for everything. So this software here is entirely based on USD and is a pure layout tool. But some of you may be using Unreal Engine. Some of you may be using a different 3D software, and you could do the same tasks. But I wanted to show it to you just to give you an idea of what's going on here, and to give you a better idea of some of the USD capabilities. So one thing that you see here is that you have, again, groupings. And here we have the scene browser, similar to the one you saw just in Fusion, just a bit more shiny for more features in that 3D software. And you see there's, for example, an architecture group where we can get the building. And then there's a props group where we get all the props. And inside the props group, I can, for example, find the refrigerator, or the group with the entire refrigerator. And you can, turn on the visibility and so on, right? By the way, those things you can also do in Fusion. You can turn things off with a U visibility tool, or you can select individual and only get the fridge to make a mask from it. Those kind of things you can do. This one here is, you see there's a symbol which looks slightly different, because this is coming as an asset from a different file. So if you take the entire package, you have one main USD file, and then you have lots of USD files like in a folder structure hidden away. And this one, for example, you see the files somewhere down here. There's a refrigerator USD. So someone created a refrigerator, someone else later put it here in the scene, and the files are just being linked. There's no duplication of data. It all comes in here, and the underlying assets could be manipulated from here and then saved back or in the internal files. So this is a very flexible and very efficient setup, what USD gives us here. One feature I still want to point out, even though that's currently not as visible in Fusion. So we do have layers in USD. So this is very common to separate out certain tasks or certain work by different artists. So you might have one layer, that's the kitchen set here, that's the original one. And I have already added 2 additional layers where I have added my own additions. And I could do this without touching the original file. So the original one here is still in place. There's the kitchen set USD, which was what I downloaded. And I have added in a different layer my cameras and lights. And if I bring those in, then you see that they appear in the stage here, cameras and lights. And if I turn on the stage lights, you see the effect of those lights. And I can select the camera and see what camera animations I've created here. And I can check how this looks like with different render engines, because here I already have a few different ones to choose from. Again, I hope this will be come into Fusion at some point. But the Pixar Storm is available here, standard preview engine. Then we have an RTX real-time engine, and you see things start to look a lot better. And you start to see reflections and more, the ambient occlusion gets better and more diffuse lighting and so on. There's a path tracing, which is even a bit better. And then the most accurate one here is this iRay, which usually takes a while. I use the path tracing to render out my cameras here. So what we can do now is we can go back into Fusion and can bring it back and see how a render from here looks like in Fusion. Even before we do this, I'm almost skipping one step. I can, of course, bring my extended set, which has the cameras and lights. I can bring this set and do a U render node. And here I have the cameras. So they're now all part of the set, right? The cameras, I don't need to attach them individually. They're all in the scene. I could separate them out. I could also, I did save them in a separate layer, so I could bring them separately into Fusion if I wanted to. But I don't need to. If I want to, I can just have the entire scene with the camera here and just attach that to my media out. And that's how easy I could bring in a preview render into DaVinci Resolve. So perhaps the 3D scene isn't even ready yet. Maybe I haven't rendered it yet. I might still do changes, but I can start putting previews in the timeline just like this. Let's make a super simple preview sequence by just copying this 3 times. Let me move this out of the way. Go back into Fusion, change the camera in the second one to camera 2. And in the third one, I'm changing it to camera 3. Let's go back. And now we have a mini movie in our Fusion timeline from a 3D scene that perhaps I haven't even rendered yet. And if I make any changes in the 3D scene, all I need to go is go to Fusion, click on Reload, and it will update the changes right away into my edit timeline. So that's kind of cool. In general, I think I'm always surprised and always find it cool that a software that can export TikTok videos can also connect to 3D production pipelines. So just thinking about that is fascinating, I find. All right, I did already render before, so we don't need to wait for any render jobs. So I will just put the renders here on top. And you see now I switched to my final render here. This does look a bit dark, right? And I did send in EXR files, and I haven't enabled color management. So those have linear gamma. And yeah, I think we always have to talk about color management at some point, right? It's such a popular topic. So I will just do a manual color management. I could just turn on color management, but Darren has infested so many people with node-based color management. People ask me all the time, how do you do node-based color management in Fusion? All right, so thanks, Darren. And here it comes. I have a CST node in Fusion, color space transform. And what do I do here? Well, I need to know what I have here. And actually, this is Rec 709 linear. Typically, I might use ACES linear. But there's a reason why I don't, because I forgot to check the settings before clicking on render. So the default was Rec 709 linear. And where do we go with the output? Well, we could go to a timeline space. If you want to do color grading, you can send it to DaVinci White Gamut or ACES CCT or whatever you want to use, and then continue from there in the color page. But in this case, sorry, Darren, I'm not doing a color page today. So I'll just do the quick way and do sRGB or Rec 709. Let's do Rec 709 and just go directly to my output space, because I skipped the color page and any further processing. And this way, if I go to the edit page, I have the brighter render in here. Let me go to Fusion again, and let me once again play colorist here. And I think I've seen how colorists work. They select the clips where they need something, then they do middle mouse button, and then override. You can apply the same awesome color management to all your clips. So now we have converted 3 Fusion clips to Rec 709 using Fusion CST nodes. All right. So we could take this further. We could take the USD scene and use it to manipulate the render. If you want to expand on something, maybe we need some masks, we can take that out from USD. I'm not going that deep here now because of the time, but I have done a test here before, so I can quickly illustrate what is possible if you want to go in this direction. So what I've done here is this is the same scene. I added some text in the background. You see the text lives in the scene, and I've added some depth of field. And all of this is, coming from Fusion. So if I turn this on off, you see this is all coming from Fusion. And this can sometimes be interesting because sometimes you have, for example, product renderings or so, but then want some text which perhaps later needs to be changed or being translated to different languages or whatever. And ironically, some very good 3D software that I've seen, sometimes they are astonishingly complex when it comes to simple text. Sometimes it gets really annoying. Here in Fusion, it's just adding a text node. So I'll quickly walk you through what I've done here. I've done 2 things. So here I have added the text into my preview 3D scene. Then I used UVisibility to turn everything off except the text. But I still have, from my scene, I still have the cameras. So I can render this text matching with the correct camera. In addition, I've enabled a Z path, so a depth map for this scene for the render output. And I have rendered the original scene also with a depth map with a Z channel, and via a channel Boolean, mixed that into my rendered image that's coming from externally. So what I have is I have footage which now has RGB and Z channel. If I do Z, you will probably not see anything because of the value range. We could make it visible, but doesn't matter. But now I can do a simple merge and enable a depth merge, and it can merge based on the Z depth of the foreground and the background image, and both are coming out here. And that's how this works. Now, for the professionals among you, this is not the very best way to render things because the depth channel can lead to anti-aliasing problems. You can sometimes see some issues with semi-transparent pixels if you look closely. There are ways to fix this and work around this. We can work with layers and so on. But sometimes for something very simple, you may get away with it. Another thing that you can do is if you can render out technical channels, and the depth channel, unfortunately, is so far the only one we have here. I think it's the only one that Storm can do. Again, I'm hoping for more advanced render engines in the future. But if you just have a depth map here, a Z channel, you can artificially use a depth blur, which depends on this channel, and creates a depth map here. Let me show you with the color space transform. And you see here, I have a blur effect that has the focus point somewhere here and blurs towards the depth. There are also more advanced ways of doing depth blur. I've done a longer YouTube tutorial on this. If you're interested in this, check it out. There are quite good ways to use a depth channel to make a really good depth of field effect if you don't want to do it in the 3D application, if you want to save some time there, or if you need to match things with live action footage, it makes sometimes sense to throw it over here. Now, I want to leave it at this point talking about the integration from an external 3D software and bringing stuff into Fusion. I do realize there will be people here in the chat and in the stream who might just work in Fusion or just started with 3D. And I want to show you a super simple compositing example where I just use a 3D asset. And I just use a USD asset because it's so easy to get it, and the compatibility is so much better than with the previous meshes that we had in the past. So I just want to show you from that perspective in the last few minutes how I can bring in some 3D. And I'm going to this clip. This is also available for download if you want to play with it later. It's available from Pixabay. Just one note, I have, first of all, trimmed it to 100 frames because the original one is like super long. And second of all, I have sped it up by factor 3. So this is what I've done before, just to have a bit more movement. You don't have to do it. You can just take a few frames from the original one if you want. And it'll be fine for practice purposes. I have chosen this clip also because it has good contrast and features everywhere and is very simple for 3D camera tracking, because that's what we have to do now. And this will be the fastest 3D camera track you have seen in the history of 3D camera tracking. So camera track, camera tracker 3D. Let me connect it. And now I do something which will, whoops. OK, apparently I played around with the viewer before, so I will not use that viewer now. Apparently, I will do something that almost never works. I simply enable bidirectional and click on auto track, and that's all I do without even worrying about the parameters. Then I will completely skip the camera tab because I have no idea what camera was used, and simply click on solve and see what we get. And we get an error of 0.7 pixels. Let me apply the filter and delete some and solve again. And I might do this 2 or 3 times. Yeah, let me apply this again. Let me reduce the maximum solve error. And again, 3D camera tracking can be super complicated, and I could easily talk 2 hours about it. But I don't have 2 hours unless Casey wants to change the entire day of ResolveCon. But also, it's not the topic. The topic is USD. So I'll end here. For high-quality production, maybe you would still need to do a little bit more. But this will just do the job for us. So 3D camera tracking produces 2 things. It produces a 3D camera, and it produces references to the scene. So you get like these points that are being tracked here in relation to 3D space. You need both of them, and you need both of them accurate in order to position something in the scene. So what we want to do is we position something here where one of these points are. And to do this very quickly, again, fastest 3D track in history, I quickly go to unaligned because I need to realign the camera solution to the actual scene. So I go to unaligned. I just select one point where I want to position something. Let's say this one. I put the 3D origin on this point. So this is where the center of the new 3D world will be. And then I select a few of these points and use them to put the ground plane through those points, and then go back to aligned. So now, if everything went well, we have a 3D scene which has the origin here, and then the ground aligned with our ground. And if all of that works perfectly, I can put something on the ground, and it should be stable in the final image. Let's see if that's true. So I click on export. I get my traditional 3D system here. And we can use this to check where those points are, and we can position stuff here. But I will just trust that everything went well, which usually it doesn't, but today I'm optimistic. And I will just use the camera here. This is the most important part, the camera. And the camera projects something in the background. This doesn't work with USD, so I disconnect that and use the camera alone. And I want to bring this into a USD scene. So let me get some USD models. Actually, I already put some here. No, we have here, this barrel. That's what I want to use. Let me go back here, put it here. So this barrel gets afterwards a U merge. In the merge, I can bring my traditional camera to merge it into the USD scene. Then we need a USD render node, uRenderer. And what's coming out of this? A barrel that moves, that sits in the origin. That's how the barrel was aligned already. It sits in the origin of the 3D scene on the ground plane of the 3D scene. And it's matching the camera movement. And if all of this went as planned, then I can merge this in, and the barrel is in the scene. And if my 3D track and the position of the ground plane, if everything was accurate, it should be completely rock solid on the ground. It probably isn't, if I'm honest. So if I move in, yeah, sometimes you might, oh, this is better than I expected. So if the accuracy is not high enough, then it will start sliding and it looks like it's shifting over the ground and going away. And then one of two things can happen. Either your camera solve isn't accurate enough, or you haven't placed it accurately with the points on the ground. One of those two things, often the second one. All right. Just for the fun of it, I have prepared a bit more. So we do have, what do we have here? We have a concrete barrier. And what do we have here? We have a U volume, because we haven't used it yet, which has like a small fire. So U volume uses volumetric data, and you can use particle simulations from other software. And here I have a little fire simulation. So let me bring those in as well. Let's connect all of this and see what we get. Let me check in the 3D scene. All right, so everything is on top of each other. So first of all, the fire, let me move that. Oh, I already moved it. Okay, I don't see it against the background. Let's see how it looks like. Oh, I already moved it up apparently while creating this. So I put it U transform here to move things around. Apparently I did that beforehand already. So this one is in the right place. Great. The barrier is not in the right place. So I just use this one, and I will add a U transform to move it around. U transform. And now, because this one is also sitting, it's aligned with 0, 0, 0. I've made sure of that before. If you load something in most cases, the orientation and the alignment should be correct if the artist has set it up correctly. But sometimes you get stuff where the origin is somewhere else, or the scale is not matching, or it's a factor 100 larger than you need it. All those things happen, and then you need to transform it, bring it in place, make sure that the origin is at 0, 0, 0, and from there you can easily move it around. And if I don't move it in Y, but only in X and Z, then I should stay on the ground. And if I don't move it up the stairs or so, but stay here where the ground plane was, then this should also be pretty solid on the ground. All right. So this is pretty easy. So if you could add more. I added some more assets to play with in the package. If you want, you can add more there, or you could maybe color grade this a bit, or perhaps put some broken glass textures at the end. There's certainly stuff to play with. There is one thing that is still like USD and 3D related that I'm not happy with, and that is the fact that the ground doesn't really have a shadow here. Normally, if something is on the ground, things should be pretty dark on the ground. And let's see if we can manufacture a shadow in very short time. So you could either create a mask, but Gedali has shown you a lot of things about creating masks very well and about rotoscoping. But here we have 3D, so perhaps we can somehow use these 3D models. Ideally, if those 3D models were set up correctly, then you could take the model itself and select the ground and separate that out with the U visibility. Here, these are like one-piece models, so I can't select a ground alone in 3D space. So I need to do something else. So what I will do is I will U transform. Let's look at it. And in this U transform, I pick my barrel here, and let me copy this and this, and I'll just do here copy and paste to quickly get both of them. And for those two assets, I will scale them down to 0 and render this out. And now I have ignored the fire. Let's forget about the fire for a second. Yeah. And I use simply a brightness and contrast here, and maybe a blur to use this as a mask on my brightness and contrast. Let's blur this a little bit. And I should exclude the fire, I know. But with this mask, I can create a ground shadow. So very quick trick to build a mask from a 3D model, even though I can't take that model apart right now. I created a mask just by squashing it to the ground and put the model on top. And now you see this model with the softness of the blur has a contact shadow, which helps a lot for making this solid. And with this, my timer says that I'm done, if I said it correctly. If not, Casey, let me know, and I can add 2 hours of 3D camera tracking.
Yeah, man, that was yeah, everybody's gonna take a nap now, dude. I can't believe you did a 3D solve live. I would never do that. That was great.
I practiced this one beforehand.
I'm sure you knew it would work. That was great, man. I really like that squishing the 3D down to make the shadows trick. I didn't think about that. That's super smart, man. There's a lot to unpack there, man. This is really great. Thank you. Let's do some questions here. All right. Is 3D in the free version of Resolve?
Yes. Everything I've done here works.
What a confident answer.
Everything works except the 3D camera tracker.
Yeah.
Sorry. That one needs the studio version.
All right. Okay, what are the advantages of USD over traditional, and when would you suggest using one or the other?
Oh, I think we have a lot of this in this tutorial. So main advantage, more compatible. That's I think the number one. It's much easier to transfer assets around, to update stuff, and so on. All that pipeline related stuff is much easier. If you only use Fusion, you do have better materials. The Scene Explorer gives you some more options. If you import assets, you have certain things easier, more modern materials, Material X, and so on. Render engine, yes and no. So there are some things that the Storm render engine does well, but there are also some things that the traditional system does better. So when you think about projections, particles, that kind of stuff, you still need the traditional system. And I guess a lot depends on what Blackmagic Design does next, to see where this goes. I have the feeling that over time it will move more towards USD, because this is just a set where it will be much easier to bring in newer rendering technology and newer materials and so on. And we see how that is appearing already.
Wonderful. All right. Theoretically, could we create textures in Fusion and use them in Blender? If so, how would this work for normal maps?
Well, would you want to? But theoretically, yes. I mean, so since the topic is USD, let me say from USD, we can currently not export. So there's no USD export at the moment. We have FBX export, but we cannot export USD. For example, if you take the scene and you make some change, transform whatever, and you want to send that back, that's currently not working. With the traditional system, that's working. Speaking of textures specifically, yeah, I mean, textures are images at the end of the day. So you can, paint your own images, use noise, whatever, and at the end save an image file out and put that into your texture in your other software. So yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, I would think that's probably not a super great workflow most of the time. I think they were talking about using like a depth, like a depth map, and then kind of making textures from that, which I think there are probably other tools out there that would be more appropriate.
I mean, specifically for texture painting and so on, there are dedicated software packages that do that really well, right? Even your standard 3D software might not be the best for that, depending on what you're doing.
All right. Can the same 3D production pipeline work for Unreal Engine?
I'm not sure how far Unreal Engine is with USD support, but definitely. I mean, they do support USD, definitely. I'm pretty sure that what we've done today, that this works with Unreal Engine. I have to check how you can. I mean, most software starts by creating an option to either import or export USD or both. For example, with Blender, you can import USD, you can export USD, but for example, you may not yet have the layer support of that I've shown you. So the different software supports it to different extent, but generally exporting it out is something that's becoming more and more easy with those software packages.
Yeah, I'm sure if it's not in there right now, like exporting USD from Unreal Engine, like in
I
a good
would
way, I'm
guess
sure they're
that it
working
is.
on it. So, all right, can we render out a light pass from U nodes that can be comped on top of the actual render?
What type of light path? So, I mean, at the moment, the Storm render engine doesn't do much. It sends us from Storm itself, you get the RGB render path, and then you get the Z depth map. You could do something, for example, let me, I don't think I need to show it. What you could do is, for example, you could replace the material and make everything white, and then put in some lights and then render that out. So
Sure.
then you get like light and shadows from your 3D scene with custom lights that you have placed. I don't know if that's what he means by light path, but
Yeah,
that
I
would
think
make sense to me.
yeah, they don't really have a like just a render pass that you can select for lighting, but you could do some tricky things like what you would normally do in a 3D software that doesn't have support for that is just, retexture everything black or gray or something and then put lights on it and then render that out. You could totally do something like that with USD.
Yeah. I mean, you do not get, with Storm, you don't get the option like to render out like a beauty path and emissive path and like that kind of separation that 3D software typically does. I don't think Storm is built for that. So.
All right. Is there a way to make 3D displacement in a USD mesh or to a USD mesh in Fusion?
Whoa, good question. I don't think we have a U displace node, right? No, I don't think we have that. Let me think. Is there any workaround? Can you think of a quick one?
The U shader supports displacement maps. So
Right. Yes.
use that.
Yeah. As long as you have like an image displacement, right?
Yeah.
Then that would work. Yeah.
So, yeah, you could do that, and
I guess that's
there's
the workaround.
bump maps and normal maps and stuff there too. This is not a question, but just a shout out to Bernd, who made me discover the expression in Fusion many years ago with his binoculars effect. And thanks to Casey for all these live streams. Hey, thanks. That's cool.
You're welcome.